I think not unlike the John D. Stephen Dawn of Light and Liberty image, we're seeing a manifestation in photography in the early 20th century here that brings it much more in alignment with what we expect from other visual forms, in terms of this image being more suggestive than depictive in its intent. It doesn't give us a lot of information, as it were. It's meant to, I think, in ways perhaps greater than many, if not most, of the other photographs in the MacKinnon collection, suggest photography's capacity to address memory and nostalgia, and to be able to personalize experience that we see in these images. And in that way, it has the capacity to be much more emotive and address less tangible aspects of the world. And so here, we have a young person out in the forest, presumably alone, gazing into a mirror. Again, somebody who is at an age in which change is at the forefront. On the sort of the promise of adulthood, but still with those adventurous aspects brought along from childhood, and all of the knowns and unknowns that seem to be converging in unexpected ways at that age. The sort of self-reflectiveness and solitude in this forest environment. So it's almost as if we're catching a glimpse into a private moment.
Yeah, well, but while at the same time being so staged for that, I think what is one of those interesting things that we see this in movies all the time, where you look at the reflection in the mirror and you see the person's face, and it looks as though they are looking at themselves in the mirror, but they're not, because at their angle, in order for us to see their face, they have to be looking at the reflection of the camera. So when she's looking into that mirror, she's seeing the camera lens. She's not seeing herself. Whenever I've played with mirrors before, I keep out and I want somebody to, I have to say, look at the camera in the mirror, don't look at yourself in the mirror. And then that way you sort of get that it looks like they're looking at themselves. I find it odd with this one, though, that the mirror is so dark here that obviously the way this has been edited, she's been lightened up, her head, her arm, neck, and what have you, so that your attention gets drawn here and it gets darker. I would have expected the reflection to be slightly lighter. I mean, again, if we just open that in Photoshop, first of all, if we take the levels and just bring up the highlights and bring down the shadows a little bit, so you get that's probably a little bit more how it would have looked before it was starting to fade. But I think also what I will do is if I will just take the curves here and brighten that up and then mask off that whole area, and then just with the curves paint back in that. So all I'm doing here is just lightening up that particular area. In a way, maybe that's slightly too bright, but just pull that down a little bit. Something like that, I think, would have made slightly more sense with the printing. We're drawn to her, but that reflection is a really important part of the picture. And I think in the printing process, as we see it here, it's kind of got a little bit lost. So I don't know whether that was accidental or whether that was purposeful with that. But I found it quite surprising when obviously the face and the neck has been brightened up. You would also want to have that bit of mirror there grabbing a little bit more attention as well.
Also, why is the mirror stuck onto a tree like that?
Yes, yeah, no, absolutely. Again, I suppose in a way this is more like an illustration than a painting. You wouldn't see a painting so much like this, but I can imagine it almost like that kind of Alice in Wonderland style, you know, or the turn of the century Edwardian style illustrations where you're creating, you know, an image, or like Peter Pan kind of thing. You know, it's not full-on paintings, and this photography sort of seems to be trying to cross over some kind of boundary. Or maybe, I mean, is this around the era of the Cottlestone fairies? You know, there's almost that kind of feel to that slightly otherworldly, as you say, kind of cusp of puberty and what have you, where world is changing as well. And it's certainly evoking some kind of, you know, nostalgic ideal, I suppose, rather than a documented reality.
Yeah. Well, and of course we know from just think of the George Washington Wilson image of the Forth Bridge, how absolutely sharp and you know, printed with such clarity that image is from, you know, nearly 50 years prior to this one. So we have to ask the questions. Well, right, how did we regress here somehow? No, the intention was to create essentially a more romantic image, and one of the ways to suggest that in a photograph was to use various tools at hand to make it softer,